This goes into when we talk about the Holy Spirit 103. How did the Holy Spirit lead the apostles towards faith in the resurrection of Jesus?
The Holy Spirit gave the apostles inner light, which we call faith. Faith is an order of knowledge beyond the natural. It is God who gives that knowledge. We must have humility. We must have obedience of our wills to God. The Holy Spirit guides the apostles with faith. That means that spiritual enlightenment, confirming therefore what Christ has said to them, because they were to be witnesses of the resurrection. They were to preach Christ crucified and risen.
Because this is really when they receive their zeal. I guess when we think about after the crucifixion, they went into the upper room and locked the doors and stayed there. And now then, until after the Holy Spirit came down upon them, that they received that zeal to go out and to teach. And
they were no longer afraid.
Right.
They began to preach. When even they were punished by the Supreme Council of the Jews, Peter and John, they were told, imprisoned, flogged. They were told, you are not to preach anymore in this name. And Peter and John said, we must obey God rather than men. We cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard. It is by the power of Jesus that this man stands before you, the person they had healed. And we are told that the Supreme Council of the Jews was surprised. How do these people who have never gone to university speak like this? Who gave them all this courage? And they thought of killing them.
That's right.
So that shows us the working of the Holy Spirit. They were no longer afraid. Indeed, eventually all the apostles were martyred. One after the other, they were killed for Christ. John, the evangelist, were told they tried to kill him, tradition says, and he didn't actually die and lived to good old age. But all the others, St. Peter was crucified with his head downwards on one of the hills in Rome, the Vatican Hill.
It always amazed me when you look through the Basilica and St. Peter and Paul, and then also in the Holy Father's private chapel, you have the symbol of Peter being hung upside down and Paul's being beheaded.
Yes.
And to show what these two great apostles went through.
They were witnesses of the resurrection.
Yes. And I think this is what we're called to do. And I guess when you think of it, before. So when we have courage and to share our faith, it's really that grace. It's grace within us. It's God's power that's working in us through grace and the Holy Spirit. When we can't really claim that we have that power. It's God working through us when we're sustained in the cross.
It is God who begins.
Yes.
It is God who continues and who gives us the strength to go ahead. Not without our cooperation. But all that is the mystery of God's grace. How we, weak creatures, working under the influence of the Holy Spirit, can do things that we could never have imagined ourselves able to do.
Well, I think it's so often, we live now in the United States, the New Age movement is taking a deep root with many well-educated people today, and they're getting into mysticism and into Hinduism and all the other things. And so often we know having a positive mental attitude is important, not to become negative. But then they get caught in the trap to thinking that the power comes from themselves, and the ego starts to take over, and its focus is on self. And in the Christian, in our faith, is say we can accomplish great goals and accomplish things as long as we understand it's God working through us. It's His power, and we should have that confidence in that faith. But I guess it's shifting from God to self makes the world a difference, and this is what the New Age movement is focusing on, self rather than God.
Yes, if we focus on ourselves, we will be like St. Peter, afraid, and therefore he began to sink. But as long as he looked on Christ and depended on Christ, he could walk on the waters.
Yes.
Faith, therefore, and deep humility, knowing that we are earthenware vessels, but it is God's grace working in us. If we keep to that truth, because humility is truth, we are not pretending, it is the fact. We depend on God, we are safe. If we want to depend on ourselves, we are lost.
And then slipping into also the people are talking about that higher power, or today, or another force out there. And so we have well-educated people talking about this and actually believing in this. And here we have the church with all of our history, Jesus Christ, everything else, and we can use reason to come to this, to be formed in this, and we're rejecting it. And you're seeing this sweep across. I'm talking about well-educated people. They're catching on to this old religions, really, of false gods, of demons and other things like this, and force.
It is a perpetual temptation for human beings to think that we can do it. One heresy after another, based on this type of assumption. We rely on God. Christ chose 12 people who were not the best university professors of his time. And the Supreme Council of the Jews was surprised. How do these illiterate fellows say things like that? And Christ sent those 12 people to conquer the world for him, to spread his good news in the whole world. He promised to be with them all days till the end of the world. And that's the Son of God speaking. It was in faith that they accepted that. And that's how the church spread. We must not be afraid, but we must not depend on ourselves. We depend on God. And the divine guarantee is there for the church, if only we will do our little part.